Hey, it's Paige Leneigh and I am back with another sewing tutorial. Today we're going to talk about sewing terms 101. I almost said sewing essentials because that was what last week's video was about. But this week I'm going to be telling you guys about different kind of stitches and different terms in the sewing world so you can kind of get used to them, get to know them. If you're a beginner, this is probably the best for you. There are some a little bit harder terms, I guess, intermediate, if you will. But yeah, that's what we're gonna be talking about today. So if you're new, go ahead and subscribe. If you are subscribed, thank you for coming back. Let me know what else you guys wanna see. A lot of you guys send me DMs or like on TikTok, tell me that you guys wanna see certain things. So I really appreciate that because it helps me make content. So whoever suggested this, I might have to leave her name or show her Instagram. Thank you so much. This is really smart. Like, I've been sewing so long that I kind of forget, like, people need to know these things. So the video is all about sewing terms. Let's get straight to it. So I have my handy dandy iPad here to go over all the sewing terms. And then I also did a tutorial of me sewing some of the terms. So I'll insert a video so you guys can see how I did it. And then also I will leave the vocabulary over here or over here, whatever. So you guys can screenshot or do whatever you need to. With that. I did get some of the images from online, so I will leave the website that I got them from, and then some of the photos are for me as well. So I will make sure to source that below. The first term we're starting off with is a back stitch. So a back stitch is going to be, it kind of, I mean, has what it is in the name. It's a stitch that's going backwards. It's securing your stitches. So here I have my top stitches that are red, and then my bobbin color was blue, so you guys could know. Let's see, is it focused? Nope. There we go. Sorry, I'm peeking on the side. So my bobbin was blue, so we know the difference from the front and the back. Now, in the beginning, you can see that these stitches are thicker right here in the beginning because I did a back stitch over them. I stitched all the way, and back stitched over here, back stitched over here. Very important. If you don't back stitch when you're sewing, it could leave a possibility of leaving something open. It could easily be pulled apart. You need to back stitch. So we'll talk about the difference between back stitching or regular stitching and all that later, but yes, you need to back stitch. So very important. Usually people have buttons on their machines to back stitch. So all I did was hit my button and it reversed it and bring the stitches back. And then sometimes you have to do it manually, I think. But yeah, very important. Our next term is a basting stitch. So a base stitch is going to be a stitch that is about 4 to 5 stitches apart from each other. So it's really big, if that makes sense. So the stitch length is longer than your regular stitch length. Regular stitch length is about 2.5. This was about a 4 that I did this, or a 4.5. And all you need, the base stitch, basically what that does, sometimes you base things together just to try it out to make sure it works. Or it's like a practice stitch, if that makes sense. So, you know, if I wanted to see if that was gonna fit right or look right before I actually sewed it down in a smaller stitch, so I don't have to seam rip it all out if I mess up, you baste it. So that's that, front and the back. So it looks just like our other stitches. All right, our next term is clip. So when you clip your fabric, it helps flatten a curve. So I actually have, let's see, I kind of did a clip and a grating all in one. I know this says grating, but this is what clipping looks like that. So you cut into it. When you do draping, you'll clip. So you'll pin the fabric onto your mannequin and you'll clip into it. When you clip fabric, it opens up. So if this didn't have the clips in it, it wouldn't move. It wouldn't have the flexibility. It wouldn't be as flat. It's crazy that that makes such a big difference. I didn't really know that when I first started sewing, but it really does. Our next, I'll move on to grating. Next, that's our next term. So grating is when you cut. So you have 2 pieces of fabric. This was 2 pieces of fabric sewn together right here. And when you grade, you're going to trim the fabric. That's all it means, trimming the fabric close to the seam line. So the first one, you wanna trim way closer because that's gonna help you make the surface more flat. So now if I had to fold this over, say I was folding this over each other, it makes it so much more flat because I clipped it and I graded it. So it's kind of hard without an iron, but So let's act like this looks pretty. And it's just way flatter because it's clipped. Now, if you didn't clip and grade, it would be bulky inside of here. But since we went ahead and snipped it down, it's not. And I could even grade and clip a little bit more, but I wanted to leave it big so I could show you guys and you could see it, especially with this white fabric. Our next term is finished seams. So when you sew, let's look at this. This is an unfinished seam right here. These two pieces that I just held up, this is not finished. It's just raw right now. Well, I'll insert pictures of finished seams. There's different ways you can finish a seam. You can add a zigzag stitch over if you just have a regular sewing machine. If you do have a serger, I would serge the ends. So I would just take the serger and serge all that together so as it was nice and clean. Or you can just clip it really nicely if it's a fabric that won't snag. So that's what a finished seam is. Next term is gathering. So you may see gathering in some of your clothes. You may notice what this looks like. So it's really cute, kind of looks ruffly. So you can imagine this as like a little skirt. Like that's things that are on skirts or sleeves, that type of look. So when you gather, you're going to sew. I usually do about a 3. My stitches are on 3 when I gather. And you just want to sew a line down the first strip, then the second strip, and then you're gonna you definitely wanna leave a lot of thread room when you're gathering so you can pull. If you don't leave yourself any amount of thread, now I clipped mine already, but then you can't pull it. So once you pull, the fabric will start to gather, and you can kind of make it looser or tighter depending on how much you pull it. This really comes in handy when you're making a sleeve. So you gather because you're trying to make one fabric smaller than the other so they're the same length now. So if I had a fabric that was tiny, actually like this little piece of fabric, this fabric's longer, but I gathered it so much, now they're like the same. So now it's even. So that's what gathering is. I still am not the best at gathering sometimes because when I'm pulling it, sometimes my fabric or my thread will break. So be gentle, take your time, try and be patient. I know it's really hard, but definitely be patient with that. Knit versus woven. This is very, very, very important when it comes to sewing. So your knit fabric, this is the easiest way to remember it. Your knit fabric is going to be stretchy. It's gonna have way more stretch than woven, and the ends will usually not unravel or unravel as much as a woven would. So this is a knit fabric. Think about like, your activewear, that's knit. Anything like a bodysuit. Most of bodysuits are stretchy bodysuits, playwear, dancewear, sportswear, knits. Okay. Now things like linen and other fabrics that don't have much stretch. If they did have stretch, it's going to be on the bias, and I'm going to tell you what that vocabulary is later. But this is woven. So this is my muslin. So muslin is woven. And that's the difference. So holding both of these up, they're two different types. So they're both white, but this is more stretchy, kind of hard to knit, and then that's your woven. Next, notches. Notches are so important, like very important. I didn't know how important they were because when I first started sewing, I think I might have said this in my last video, but when I started sewing, I would just take stuff from my closet and like sew it together and take other things and use patterns and all kinds of craziness. It was a hot mess when I first started sewing. I mean, I was 13. But when I started using patterns, I saw notch, notch, notch. I'm like, what is a notch? Made so much sense. So a notch is basically an indication, and these are my own terms I'm saying, but I'll put the actual ones on the side. But a notch allows you to line up your patterns. So say I had a front skirt pattern and a back, back skirt pattern, okay? Well, if I cut my notch, so I just cut it out, and usually I do a snip, so I know, but I made them a little bigger so you guys could tell. So now you're like, okay, it's like a puzzle piece. You're like, oh, this puzzle piece goes with this puzzle piece. Now they're perfectly aligned, and I can stitch wherever I need it to stitch at. But that's what a notch is. It's just like a little snip. You can buy something that does notches for you. I forget what they're called, but it does the notches for you. I just take my scissors and snip. That simple. Now our next term is right side of the fabric and wrong side of the fabric. I would think this is kind of common sense, but sometimes it's hard. Like sometimes I'm holding my fabric up to the light trying to figure out which side is which. It's really easy when fabric looks like this, and this is why I picked this one out. So this is a knit fabric. We see how much stretch it has. And I marked it, but you can barely tell. So this is the right side of the fabric, all lively and bright. And this is the wrong. We see it's a little lighter. It doesn't really have the pattern as good. Now there are some fabrics you can use the wrong side. I mean, you could even use the wrong side of this, I guess, if you wanted to, if you wanted this lighter look. But this is the right side of the fabric. This is the side the fabric should be on. So that's the difference. On your patterns, when you buy patterns, they usually mark the right side of the paper, of the fabric, like a dark gray or a dark gray. I think they do light gray for the right side and dark gray for the wrong side. And then sometimes they do like for interfacing, they will like dot it, but it's all different. So when you open up your instructions to patterns, it will let you know what they're indicating as the right side and the wrong side. Very important. Usually when you're sewing things also, you're going to put the right sides together. So if I'm trying to stitch this together, I'm gonna put the right sides together so that wrong sides are out, but then you flip it. So say I was making a little pillow, and then now the right sides are out and you won't see the seam. All right, our next term is a stay stitch. Now I didn't do a tutorial of this because a stay stitch is just a line of stitches that is that holds your fabric in place. So if you're working on a project, or say I was sewing pants, I would just stay stitch the top of them so they don't stretch out, because sometimes your fabric stretches, or if you're like laying stuff around or whatever, the fabric will move. So a stay stitch looks as just a regular stitch, just like this back stitch one, but you don't do the back stitch, just do a stitch all the way through, and that's it. And so yeah, stay stitches definitely just help you keep it all together. And I'll leave the exact terms over here. I guess what I would say is it provides more stability for the fabric. So that's a good way to put it. All right, seam allowance. Seam allowance is the distance you leave from your stitches or your seam. So say this was the seam of my shirt I was doing. All this is seam allowance, and I think this is about a ½ inch of seam allowance over here if I were to measure it. So when you're looking at patterns, once again, it's saying a 1/4 seam allowance, or ½ inch seam allowance, or an inch seam allowance. I'll never use an inch worth of seam allowance, but if that was the directions, that is what seam allowance is. So it's when you're sewing stuff together. I'm just pulling these different samples. Like this seam allowance right now is tiny because I've cut it all off, but that's what they're talking about. The next term is top stitching. So we're gonna take this grading one that I already used to show you guys what I mean by top stitching. I didn't do a tutorial, but it's pretty self-explanatory. So say I was flipping this fabric over. There we go, trying to get it clean again. And now I want to stitch it. Now that I have it rolled over, and I would press it if I normally was doing something. But from here, you would top stitch over the seam allowance and the seam, I guess, because your seam allowance would be graded inside of here, and you would just stitch on top, and that would be a top stitch. All right, so these next set of terms all go together. I have 4 terms I'm going to tell you guys about. So we're talking about fabric, and when you're picking out fabric, you're looking at fabric, you need to know, and when you're sewing, you need to know what the cross grain is, the bias, your length grain, and your selvage. So, or your straight grain. So let's start off with the selvage. So your selvage edge is going to be the manufactured edge. So it's usually like clean like this. Oh, I have it backwards, there we go. So it's kind of hard to tell the difference. This is the finished edge. I didn't cut this. This was already like this. So this is the selvage. Parallel to the selvage is going to be your length grain. So they're running this way. The stitches are running this way, or the fabric. Then your cross grain is running along here. And your bias is usually the most stretchiest part, or is the most stretchiest part. So you can just see how I'm pulling on that and it's moving. When I do it like this, it's not gonna move as much. Like this. little more right there, but yeah. So those terms are very important because a pattern might tell you, or most of the time it's going to tell you to cut on the bias, or it might tell you to lay it, you know, on the cross grain or the straight grain. Listen to the pattern because it will change the way your clothing lays or falls on you. If you cut a sleeve or something that's supposed to go on your body that's supposed to be stretchy on a part, on say on the length grain, and the length grain doesn't have any stretch, it's not gonna fit around you. So pay attention to that, learn that, go in the fabric stores, pull on the fabric, make sure you have on hand sanitizer with Corona. But, you know, touch the fabric, feel the fabric. You know, I think it really helps. This took me a long time to kind of understand, or because it's hard when it's not on the roll. When the fabric's on the roll and you're trying to figure out, okay, what is this? What is this? The bias really helps. It's a good start because I'm like, okay, the stretchiest part is this way. And then maybe like this nice edge is selvage. So that's all you need to know. That's all you need to remember. Now that I have showed you guys all the terms, you know, all the samples that I have on here, I hope that was easy to understand. I'm going to go through and I pulled this little gym out from 2017. So this is my, was it my first or second year of college? And we had to go over samples and sewing terms. So we have length grain, crosswise grain, standard stitching, fine stitch length, basting stitch, angled stitching, curve stitch, seam allowance. So many terms. But I want to go through now. Don't judge my samples. This is, I mean, I did know how to sew when I got to college, but I kind of was just like rushing through. So I want to show you guys this because I feel like it will help. So the first page of my sample workbook, and I'm gonna run through it if I already said this because I don't want to be repeating myself because some of those terms you guys heard I just told you about. So I think I'm reading a book. Grain line. So you see we're talking about the lengthwise grain. So up and down this way, it follows the warp of the yarns, or the warp yarns of a woven fabric. The cross is on the weft. So I guess that's really, there's a warp and a weft on the fabric, and I will show you guys pictures so you can kind of understand a little bit better, but that's easy to remember that the cross grain is on the weft and the length grain is on the warp. Then we have the bias, like I said, very stretchy. The true bias intersects the lengthwise and the crosswise grains at a 45-degree angle. Okay, fine stitching. So this is just 1 millimeter of stitches, so they're super tiny. I mean, these stitches are so close together, super close. So yeah, smaller stitch lengths are sometimes utilized for stitching tight curves as they produce the smoothest curve possible. Just reading a little bit of what's up here. Then we have the regular stitching. So I was right earlier saying that a regulation stitch is 2.5 millimeters. Let's see what they say about the regulation stitching. Used for most stitching applications. So like I said earlier, and then here I'll show you guys what that looks like. A little bit bigger, 2.5. The other one was 1.0. Now the basting stitch, this is 5 millimeters plus. My bad, I said 4, but I mean, it's still bigger than 1 or 2. So this is 5. You can see that now the stitches are a little loose. You can see they're a little loose because I've basted them. It's just to hold it in place a little bit. Basting stitches, or the longest stitches achievable, are stitches that measure 5.0 millimeters or greater. Basting stitches are often utilized to temporarily join pieces together and for manual shearing or gathering. So like I said, when I did my gathering earlier, I used a 4.0 stitch. You guys don't need to know this. This is like, I don't know why they had us do this because I've never sewn anything that I needed to sew in a rectangle or this circle. It's crazy. A French seam is an enclosed seam that produces a clean finish on both the face and interior of a garment. So this is what a French seam looks like. And I didn't do a tutorial of this just because I feel like this is a little more advanced. so I didn't think there was a need for it, but you could also look up what a French seam is and how to do that if you're interested. So if you have a serger, or you can do this with a sewing machine. So this is a seam. I have 2 fabrics that I sewed together. I sewed it together, and then I open the seam and I press the seam. So I pressed it with an iron. On both sides, I serged it so it was a clean, finished seam. We just talked about finished seams and what that looked like and what that was. This is a finished seam, and it's serged or marrowed on both sides. Now with this one, this is a closed plain seam, so it's still sewn together once again like the other one, but it's pressed. Now instead of being pressed open, it's pressed to the side, and then they're both serged together, this one piece, or these 2 pieces, excuse me. So a marrowed overlock or serged edges are considered to be a clean finish as the thread of the serger machine wraps over the raw cut edge of the fabric to finish. Marrowed seams are mostly used on knit fabrics as the stitch stretches. Marrowed seams can be found in mass-produced sportswear garments. So, you know, very clean on the inside. Here I just went over zippers. I'm gonna do a total different video for like just zippers, I think, so I won't worry about these terms. They're just talking about invisible zippers. I'll show you guys though. So the invisible zipper is, you know, true to what it's saying. It's invisible. You can't see that this would be a zipper, but unzip it. So usually those are on pants or dresses. This is really clean. Let's see what else we got here. This is a fly front zipper. This is what you would see on jeans or pants. So this is a little more tricky, definitely. Darts are going to take up excess space and define shape in your garment. So usually women have darts on their bust areas or maybe on their waist. And when you see something that has a dart in it, that's how you know like it's constructed really well, because or someone's garment that has clothes that fit really well, they usually have darts in it. So I love darts. They're amazing. They're usually in this like small triangle shape. So like you start out and then you come all the way in and it takes up that space. This is just another type of dart, a double end dart. So it goes in, or hold on, starts in, out, back in. Let's see. This is another sample of gathering. My original sample from 3 years ago, going on 4 years. We could skip this. We already did notching and grading. And we don't even know this. Pleats. So box pleats can be utilized as a dart and also provides fullness. So in a skirt, you would see a box pleat. There's actually called box pleat skirts. I'll show you guys what that looks like. But you can see almost what it would look like in that picture. But yeah, this is a box pleat. And then they can also be inverted too, so it can be flipped the other way. Oh, here is the inverted pleat. So this one is just the reverse of what you guys just saw. They can provide fullness and easier movement. So I will go over that as well later. But yeah, those are my terms from school. I don't know why I had this kitty cat binder, and I do not like cats. I hope this video provided you with insight and clarity on new sewing terms. If you're a beginner, helped you if you're intermediate, brushing up. I mean, sometimes I forget exactly what they mean. So I really hope this helped. Hopefully the terms provided a lot of clarity as well. So screenshot, write them down, take notes, whatever you need to do. Drop a comment, leave a like. I really do appreciate you all. I'm really trying to build it up, run it up. So every little comment and like and subscription really does matter. And I hope that I can provide clarity for you guys in the future of sewing. So take care, much love. See you guys next time.